My goal is to help you understand as much as I can about custom clothing and what the advantages are. In a previous segment, I went into some detail, and I'd like to try not to be redundant. But I'd like to teach you as much as I can about the differences of custom tailoring to help you make a judgment whether perhaps you've tried custom tailoring and it was a disappointment for you and you've decided you don't want to try again. Maybe it wasn't really custom tailoring, or maybe it was of a kind that's different from what we do. Or it may be that you've spent some money on custom tailoring and you were satisfied, but you thought it was too expensive. There's a mix. Let's break it down briefly, if we may, into three elements: fit, workmanship, and fabrics. I think you know that I believe that the fit of your clothes is everything. You can tell when a man gets out of his car from across the street a lot about him by the way his clothes fit. And it's very elusive. It's almost impossible to find clothing that fits properly. The reason for that is that for it really to fit properly, it needs to be made specifically for you, from scratch, by a pattern-making tailor who has the expertise to draw a pattern from scratch just for you on the cloth to address the shape of your back, the slope of your shoulders, your waist length, the way your arms hang, your individual distribution of measurements, where there's no correlation between how big your chest, how wide your shoulders, how deep the crotch, and many, many, many other things. And sadly, that's hardly done by 1 out of 100 tailors anymore. It's the way that all clothing was custom made for centuries, until about 30 or 40 years ago, when the young tailors simply didn't want to take the time to apprentice their fathers and spend an extra several years learning the art of pattern making. To watch a tailor do this is quite phenomenal. You can't figure out how in the world they learned to do this with nothing more than a piece of chalk and a ruler, and looking at your measurements and perhaps photographs of your posture. They just began freehanding it out on the cloth, cutting it, and a good tailor, with a little help from us, who tells them the formulas of how the suit should fit perfectly, can make a suit that'll fit perfectly the first time and continue to fit perfect. But sadly, pure custom clothing has been replaced progressively, first 10% and then 50%, then 95% the last few years, by a shortcut method that's very difficult to distinguish from the real thing, because you don't know what's going on in the back cutting rooms after you leave, so to speak. That process is called made-to-measure tailoring, and it's where a ready-made pattern that's a block pattern, a 1/4 inch thick cardboard template, the shape of a suit, a front panel, a back panel, is put on a fabric and traced around, and sometimes shifted, always shifted, for the squareness of your shoulders or your waist length, etc. Sometimes it's done with fittings, sometimes none. It never fits like a pure custom suit, in my experience. And I have formidable experience. I've had workshops, 79 of them in all, make trial orders. And not once have I ever delivered a suit to a client at full price that was made by any of these workshops, because it wasn't the real thing. And I wouldn't put my name, my label, or take a profit on it. I may have wanted to experiment with a workshop and asked somebody if he'd like to buy a suit for a discounted price, or made a free suit for somebody, or my father, or one for me, but I've never once, in the course of testing these 79 workshops, ever delivered a suit at full price. They leave a lot to be desired. The process resembles the selection of fabric, where you select from a book, you get measurements taken, usually only 8 or 10, not 35. They wouldn't know what to do with those 35 measurements. So the shortcut made-to-measure process, it typically requires 8 or 10 measurements. It's sent to a factory. At that factory, they stack all of the size 40s on one table, the 42s on another, the 44s on another. They cut them 20 or 30 at a time with a laser knife, and then they're put together on a production line with a pocket maker, a sleeve maker, a collar maker, putting them together like a ready-made suit. Essentially, a made-to-measure suit is this far from an off-the-rack suit because it's made from a standard pattern. It's like an off-the-rack ready-made suit that's having alterations incorporated as it's being made. Seriously. Whereas a pattern-making suit, one that's made from your individual pattern that addresses not only your shape, but your individual distribution of measurements, where there's no correlation between any two of those measurements, provides a completely different result. It's a smooth fit that conforms to you and your shape, and it feels different, and it's yours. So let's leave the subject of fit, except for me to say that the real advantage to having a pattern-made suit, other than having the smooth, beautiful fit, is that it has the capability of delivering one perfect suit after another, without fittings, without alterations, because it's your pattern. The art was in the making of the pattern. As you expand or contract slightly from one order to the next, that's the easy part. It was made right in the first place for your shape. That's the important thing to remember. Okay, the second of the three elements that determines one custom suit from another is workmanship. Remember, fit, two different kinds. Made to measure semi-custom tailoring, which accounts for 95%, and pattern making, which is less than 1% probably, let's say between 1 and 5%. The next category is workmanship, and that basically, let's say, falls into three categories. 95% of all off-the-rack suits are fused or glued together. That's been necessary the last 30 or 40 years because of the prohibitive cost of labor. To have somebody sit and sew a suit properly for the better part of a week is just prohibitively expensive. As that suit moves through the distribution chain, or even if it's made by a tailor, it typically ends up very expensive. So 95% of the suits on the marketplace are fused or glued together with a sticky backing to give the fabric some shape. Custom suits typically that are made in countries where they learned this art of pattern making from the British many years ago are typically made so cheaply that you're really almost better off buying an off-the-rack suit that doesn't fit as well. Because if the suit has components that are crude and heavy and coarse, and if they're put together with stitches that are 2 and 3 inches apart, all of that sort of doesn't hold the shape of the suit after it's dry cleaned once or twice. The shoulders begin to twist across the top, the lapels get wavy, the collars are typically put on too tight, or the inner lining inside shrinks and it causes the jacket lapel to turn over and flop over like this, and 100 other things go wrong with it. So to have a suit that really has the workmanship that you want to make that suit look good for 25 or 30 years requires a certain level of labor that requires the better part of a week, with thousands and thousands of tiny hand stitches where the tailor actually shapes your chest, the pitch of your shoulder, and with a hot iron presses it and shapes it and then sews it together with thousands of little stitches that holds that suit through 30 years of wear and hopefully not too many dry cleanings. So that suit has the capacity to be worn hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times without falling apart. So that is real value. So of the three elements, that's the lowdown on workmanship. It's basically either fused, or it's made too quickly without enough handwork and with coarse components, or it's made properly with expensive components and on the lap of a single tailor for the better part of a week, which is the way we make our clothing and is what gives you a legitimate, beautiful custom suit that's going to last you for many years. The third element, and in my mind still important, but perhaps the least important of all, is the issue of fabrics. And that can make a big, big difference in the price of a suit as well. On the one hand, at the very extreme level, some fabrics are actually reprocessed wool. You can buy those fabrics for $5 or $10 a yard. That means they were something else before, maybe a suit. They went to a reprocessing factory, they ground it up, they created new fibers, and they make it a suit again. Believe it or not, in China and Italy, they do this sort of thing. Inexpensive fabrics are available for $10 or $15 a yard, and they're often used by tailors who send it to a cheap made-to-measure semi-custom workshop and pay $200 or $300 or $400, $20 a yard for fabric, $80 worth of fabric, and $200 to make it, and they'll sell a suit for $700 or $800. So there are suits that you can buy for $800 custom made or $8,000. A fellow who we'd trained and worked for us for a while recently went to work for a company that sells suits for $15,000 to $25,000. Ironically, they're not custom made, they're made to measure in a factory in Italy. But they're selected from a swatch book and measurements are taken and fittings are done, and it appears to be custom made. So you can spend a great deal of money for a suit with a wonderfully expensive fabric that isn't even legitimately custom made. Fabrics are measured by their thread count and their weight. The weight is 8.5 ounces, 9 ounces, 10 ounces. It's a bolted fabric that's 60 yards put on a scale and divided by 60, which determines how many ounces per yard. And sophisticated clients, usually by their second or third suit, can start to distinguish the difference between a 9-ounce cloth and a 9.5-ounce cloth. It's a great way to continue to get what you want, sort of by a little bit of experimentation. Becoming a connoisseur or an aficionado in the world of clothing and fabrics is not unlike cigars or good brandies or good wines or beers, and a great deal of enjoyment can be had for that. You can find your favorite series of fabrics according to finishes: tropical worsteds, gabardines, crepes, flannels, cavalry twills, and you can get into thread counts of super 110s, 120s, 130s, 150s, 180s. The finer the fabric, the finer the fiber, the more fibers you can put per square inch. It doesn't necessarily buy better quality, it doesn't buy less wrinkles, it doesn't buy longer lasting service. That part of it's for you. As I see it, the fit is for everybody who sees you, the workmanship is for everybody who sees you, including you, and the fabric basically is for you. Now, it's by no accident that many clients will admit that their favorite suit just happens to be the most expensive one they had. But if you have to compromise somewhere, start with a good basic fabric. It doesn't have to be too extraordinary. And have the suit properly made according to the pattern and your fit. And then as time goes on, you can escalate if you decide as you're doing well and you are really enjoying the process. Then you can experiment. And in terms of communicating with us, make sure that we are clear about what you want to spend. It's important that we keep you at the point that you want to be so that you continue to be happy, stay our client, as many, many of our clients do and have for some 36, 37 years. It's all about communication. It's all about information. It's all about understanding the differences. And it's difficult to understand. Custom-made suits in many ways are like cars without logos. Some are Bentleys, some are Kias and Toyotas, and it's hard to know what you've got. So that's why we're here to help you gather information so that you can decide whether you want to drive a Toyota or a Lexus or a Mercedes or a Bentley in terms of that mix of those three elements: the fit, the workmanship, and the fabric. We're willing to compromise on the fabrics, not below a certain point. All of our fabrics are very, very fine English and Italian fabrics. All of our workmanship is of one kind. It's made with a Hymo canvas, a horsehair Hymo canvas, made on the lap of a tailor for days and days. That's going to keep it looking good for 25 or 30 years. But in areas of fabrics, you have a wide, wide range of things to choose from, all of which are price coded with us. From 1 to 100, that price code is indicates to us what the multiple is and what that suit sells for. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm always available to answer questions or help you understand more about custom clothing, and I look forward to being able to chat with you. Thank you.